If you crack first, Dave, it won't make you any less of a man.
I'm nowhere near cracking.
Neither am I, my friend.
Dave. And Matthew, what is it now? For God's sake, no one's smoking, okay? But nothing! You know what we need around here is an anti-whining ordinance. So just sip your sniveling little lip and haul your skinny ass out.
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes, and not too long ago, I had my good friend Mark Pellegrini along with Aaron Sparrow. We were talking about the Neil Gaiman kind of controversy. Mark started his own controversy by calling him Mark Gaiman. Hopefully he doesn't, or Neil Gaiman. Hopefully he doesn't do that again. But there's some other things here to talk about, some other examples of people kind of going back in the past and kind of changing some of their original creations, or even almost apologizing. One of those is kind of Larry Hama lately. I wanted to talk about how do you feel about these things? Does it change how you feel about the creator and their past works? Obviously, with me is comic book writer, the man behind Black Hops, Common America, the partner of crime of Tim Lim, Mark Pellegrini. How you doing?
Hey, it's good to be back, and it's nice to talk about G.I. Joe. I don't get the opportunity to talk about them very much.
So when I was in the hospital, obviously we just had the baby a couple weeks ago. I had all these comics that I was ready to read, and one of them was Snake Eyes Declassified, I believe it is.
Yes, and that is such a good book.
Right at the beginning, it says this is all based off of the original works of Larry Hama, and that's how they kind of created this story. It's absolutely fantastic. It's one of the better G.I. Joe stories I've ever read. I really, really enjoyed it. Basically Snake Eyes running around with Cobra Commander,
and just double dragoning the crap out of everything. It's so great. So did Tim recommend that one to you? Because he recommended it to me, and it changed my life.
No, actually, it was Dylan from the Real Comic Book Gamer.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, it's if for people who just want to get into Marvel G.I. Joe and they find either the original trade paperbacks are out of print, or they find the 185 issues plus tie-ins too intimidating, just pick up Snake Eyes Declassified, because what it does is it takes all the backstory and mythology elements of Snake Eyes and Cobra Commander's history and Storm Shadow's history, and all that stuff that was just little nuggets strewn out across 185 issues, and then it's almost like The Life and Times of Scrooge McDuck, where it just takes all those things and strings them together into a coherent narrative, and it's so good.
And Larry Hama, if he had his druthers, would go back in time and change all of that. He's gotten some pressure now that we got the Snake Eyes movie coming up. People do not like the fact that character originally in G.I. Joe is not Asian. He's a white man with blue eyes and blonde hair, and apparently that's problematic nowadays. And the older Larry Hama would go back and convince younger Larry Hama to change that story. Now, Mark, I'm 43 years old. If 33-year-old me started this YouTube channel, it would be different. If 23-year-old me started this YouTube channel, it would be completely different. People change as they get older, and certainly Larry Hama has changed his views on some of the works that he's done in the past.
Yeah, I mean, that happens. We're never the same person that we were, even a year ago, because anything can happen that can change our worldviews. But it's more I saw this coming a long time ago, and it's kind of just I've been waiting for the other shoe to drop. And they announced the actor playing Snake Eyes in this new movie a year ago, so it's not like this is news, I guess, to people, but more that the news is Larry Hama is changing his POV on it. But I think it is once there was that fervor over the Netflix Iron Fist TV series where Danny Rand was going to be played by a white guy, because Danny Rand in the comics is a white guy, but everybody in the mainstream media, they had a slow news day.
If you're a superhero imbued with martial arts skills, you have to be a stereotypical Asian character.
Isn't that funny though? It's because so they're upset and clutching their pearls because Danny Rand, a white guy, was going to be a martial arts master. And what? He's white. He can't know karate. That's cultural appropriation. He should be Asian because only Asian people know karate. Isn't that just an ignorant stereotype? There's a scene in the original Revenge of the Nerds where I can't recall his name, the one Asian nerd. Mm-hmm. They all have to live in the gym, right? Because their frat house got destroyed by the jocks. And so the jocks are leaving the locker room and throwing all their dirty laundry at the nerds to clean. And one jock walks past the Asian nerd and looks at him and says, "Do you know karate?" And the Asian nerd goes, "No." And so the jock takes his jock strap and puts it on the Asian kid's head and walks away. It's like that's a stereotype that goes back to, to Revenge of the Nerds even further. And yet there are people now who unironically are pushing it like, oh, you can't have a non-Asian character know karate, or that's cultural appropriation. It's part of this modern day politically correct form of segregation that's just totally bewildering to people like us of our generation who are totally
pigeonholing people in entire demographics.
But it's one of those, but it's one of those things where when that happened, when all that controversy over the Netflix Iron Fist series happened, it's like, this is going to happen to G.I. Joe. It's going to happen when eventually they're going to make either a G.I. Joe 3 because Retaliation had come out and Ray Park was still playing Snake Eyes. They're going to do a G.I. Joe reboot or some form of live action G.I. Joe. And they're just going to circumvent this controversy entirely and just, play it safe and cast an Asian person to play Snake Eyes. And they did. And that's the reason why Hasbro did it. They didn't do it for any sort of philosophical or ideological reasons. They did it to avoid the negative mainstream media coverage that happened to Iron Fist. They were basically like intimidated and coerced.
Or the ancient one in the MCU, Tilda Swinton.
Yeah, that's on China though, because they didn't want a Tibetan character playing in the movie at all. So we ended up with that. So that's okay though, because China says, oh, you can race swap an Asian character into a white character, or else we won't go see your movie. And then all of a sudden, Disney and the MCU is just all over that. Oh, okay, it's okay. And the mainstream media is like, oh, you're doing it for China? A-okay, thumbs up. But there's a timeline though to this that goes between the Iron Fist, Danny Rand controversy to this current Snake Eyes movie, and that's happened in the terrible Aubrey Sitterson run of IDW's G.I. Joe comic, where Aubrey Sitterson, he was the one who wanted to make G.I. Joe a socialist movement. He was the one who did Scarlet Strike Force, that comic that got canceled after 2 issues because it was selling like under 1,000 copies.
It got canceled before they ever published the first issue
because the pre-orders were so low. Yes. And it was all about how all the oppressed minority members of the Joe team are going to form their own separate Joe team and all that stuff.
Gender swap Roadblock.
And it wasn't Roadblock. I think it was Rampart. The one who had the shirt that says "Might Makes Right" got gender swapped. But there was a part in Aubrey Sitterson's run in the main Joe book where Aubrey made a huge stink about how he thought that it was offensive that Snake Eyes knew karate and was the best martial artist in the Joe team. He thought that was cultural appropriation, and the term for it is Mighty Whitey.
Is it Swift Kick or which one's the
it was Quick Kick. So he just has this issue where Quick Kick just walks into like the training room, the dojo, and just for no reason whatsoever beats the crap. Yeah, just beats the crap out of Snake Eyes, and that's what you get. Like, Snake Eyes didn't do anything. It makes Quick Kick look like a psycho, but from Aubrey Sitterson's point of view, like, oh, this is the Mighty Whitey character getting his. This is the Asian person taking back his culture from the cultural appropriator.
He doesn't see it as the heel turn that it really is.
Right?
This is a villain now.
Exactly. But anybody with, common sense or 2 brain cells looks at that and says, like, wow, Quick Kick is insane. Like, this was completely unmotivated. But that was just one more stepping stone, the one that actually affected G.I. Joe to the idea that Snake Eyes being white is a bad thing. Snake Eyes being white was always a mistake. It needs to be fixed. Snake Eyes cannot know karate. I thought it made the character
interesting that he had to go through the training where people looked at him differently. He's kind of stood out, and he was able to weather all the obstacles in front of him. Not only the physical and the spiritual and the emotional training that he was going through, but knowing that he was different in the different expectations that were on him.
Yeah, being a gaijin in Japan is not always a pleasant experience. And that was always a part of G.I. Joe's story, even going back to those comics that Larry Hama wrote back in the 80s, was that he was always the fish out of water. He was always the one who didn't belong. And so he had to work extra hard to prove himself. And that's why he's a better martial artist than Storm Shadow and a lot of the other characters from the Arashikage.
Storm Shadow in that Declassified comes off as somewhat arrogant and entitled.
Mm-hmm. Because he doesn't have to work as hard as
because he's the heir to the throne. Did. He's a member of the family, the clan.
Exactly. Second place tries harder, and that's what Snake Eyes was, and that's why he was able to persevere. It's funny. There's a very similar plot line between Ryu and Ken in the Street Fighter mythology. If you pick up the Street Fighter 3 manga, which I think is still in print from Udon, it's very good. It adapts the Street Fighter 3 storyline, but the plot of that is that Ken surpasses Ryu. And Ken's whole thing is Ken and Ryu both studied under darn it, what's the name of their master? Goken. They both studied under Goken, and Ken surpasses Ryu, the Japanese guy. Ken, the Gaijin, technically he's a Hafu, which the Japanese hate even more. He's half Japanese, half foreign. He trains harder because he has to train harder because because he's a Hafu in Japan, and those people are despised. And he surpasses Ryu. And part of the story is that Ken has more to fight for. Ken has a wife and a family, and that's why he has to fight harder. Whereas Ryu is just a homeless guy who's still wandering around the globe, punching out minorities to try and get stronger. And that's why Ken can't surpass Ryu. And that's a storyline written by Japanese people for a Japanese audience that later got translated for the U.S. market. Like, it's a common thing, and it's not considered racist or mighty whitey in Japan. They have a narrative reason for it. And in G.I. Joe, it's the same thing, is that Snake Eyes was the one who had to try harder, who had to work harder, and that's how he surpassed Storm Shadow. And that's why he always still beats Storm Shadow, because Storm Shadow, you know, for a lot of reasons, including brainwashing, wound up with Cobra, but was also found out the error of his ways later on. But he was lost, and he was fighting for the bad guys. Snake Eyes wasn't. Snake Eyes kept fighting for the Joes and for freedom, and so they went back and forth for years and years in the comic. There was nothing mighty whitey about it. There's nothing racist or cultural appropriating about it, because the concept of cultural appropriation and stereotypes like mighty whitey didn't exist in the 80s. They were just characters and narratives and storytelling. It isn't until now, where all these political ideologies are being thrust upon every single piece of media and how we perceive it, that all of a sudden Snake Eyes not being Asian but also being able to, you know, do karate chops is a bad thing and needs to be fixed. It was always a mistake. It's tiresome.
Well, certainly, you know, Larry Hama has a different perspective on it. You know, he's talked about it, and you can see it's changed over time. There was one time that he's firmly, this is who Snake Eyes is, and I stand by my work, and it's certainly evolved over time. Does it change your appreciation or your view of what Larry Hama did in the past? Because for me, I don't care. He can say whatever he wants. I'm just here for the story. That's kind of the way I take it.
That's the thing, is I almost wish you hadn't shown me that article. I wish I just not known that Hama had changed his perspective on it. I mean, those stories are always still going to be good. And I try my hardest almost to disengage from creators when it comes to stories that I like. You know, I sure wish I had never known that Mark Waid was such an asshole, because I really enjoyed his run on Flash back in the 90s. I feel the same way about Peter David and Dan Slott. There were a lot of comics that they wrote back in the day that I really enjoyed. Especially Dan Slott is such a piece of garbage. I never want to read anything by him ever again. I wish I hadn't known. And Larry Hama, I don't think he's all that. I think that's, yeah, his perspective changed, but I also understand that just like Neil Gaiman, just like Neil Gaiman, there's a lot of studio pressure. Like, hey, he doesn't. I know he doesn't get royalties because he did all that stuff, work for hire for Marvel back in the 80s. But I'm sure that there's a check in it for him for this movie if he goes and he does the media rounds, the social media rounds, and the promotional rounds for the movie. He's probably looking at something, you know, some benefit to himself. But that also comes with the NDAs, and it also comes with the stipulation that he can't say anything negative and he can't say anything contradictory to the narrative that the studio is trying to sell this on. So all of a sudden say, hey, Larry, you always wanted Snake Eyes to be Asian, right? And then Larry says, like, yeah, I always wanted him to be Asian, and now you're fixing that mistake that I made back in the 80s. Thank you very much for knowing the character better than I did. And he's stuck in that situation. Did you see his recent Iron Man story? Or Iron Fist story? Speaking of, you mentioned Danny Rand earlier. Oh, I didn't know that Hama was writing Danny Rand. No, tell me about it.
It's called Iron Man Heart of the Dragon. So he goes this whole thing. They're in the Forbidden City, and Okoye is with him, a member of the Dora Milaje, you know, the bodyguards for Black Panther. And she has killed a dragon, and she has the dragon chi. And in order to defeat this other dragon, it's going to take the combined might of the dragon chi and the Iron Fist to defeat him. And Danny essentially gives her the power of the Iron Fist. He puts her hand on his chest, gives it to her. She defeats the dragon by herself in an Iron Fist book. And then when she tries to give it back to him, Danny says, I was never really a good Iron Fist anyway. You keep it.
Oh.
And then she puts the Iron Fist back into an egg to gestate and for someone else to discover. But that was what Larry Hama did to.
Oh yeah, he's just an Iron Fist for 45 years. But yeah, he was never really meant to be Iron Fist. Give me a break. That's
It was funny. A lot of people were mad that they got to the last issue of that miniseries.
And just for it to pull a Rey Skywalker on everybody, like, you know what, you're the best Skywalker. He's you're the real Iron Fist. All this time, character we just met, like you're gonna take the mantle up now. Okay, sure. I mean, I haven't been keeping up with. So Larry Hama picked up the IDW comic for G.I. Joe: A Real American Hero, but it's actually a continuation of the Marvel comic that he wrote for 155 issues. I hadn't been keeping up with it, but I know that he passed down the Snake Eyes mantle to a female character, and Snake Eyes has been a woman in the book for a while now. So this kind of just seems like he's just doing that, but with Iron Fist. I don't know. Maybe he's a lot of the.
I don't let this stuff bother me. I'll still read Larry Hama's Wolverine. It's great. Right? I'll still read his G.I. Joe stuff. I don't let it taint my opinion.
No, I don't have to read the new stuff. G.I. Joe for me ended with issue 155 back in the 90s, and that's where I stopped reading G.I. Joe. And it's a solid, good run of comics from beginning to end by a singular creator, which is something very rare even in the 80s to have someone on a book for that long. And it's great. I love it. It's the same thing with Marvel's Transformers book. 80 issues plus tie-ins, solid run between Bob Budiansky and Simon Furman. I'll go as far as reading the 12 issues of Transformers Generation 2, but that's where Marvel's Transformers ends for me. I don't want to read any more of the other weird, stupid IDW Transformers books that they've done since then. We all have our stopping points. Yeah. For
me, Mark Waid's a jerk off. I can still read, his Superman works, Kingdom Come. I can still read his Flash. It doesn't really bother me. I just differentiate the two. Mark Waid, probably was a jerk the entire time, but hey, he was involved in some really good comic books, and I can still enjoy them. I just don't let it. I don't let it affect me anymore. There was a time when I definitely did, but
I think the only time it really affects me is like if I actually spoke to that person and they were really like terrible to me and like really nasty. Like I can understand that if the person was a jerk to you, then all of a sudden you don't want to support their work anymore. There also, I think, with behavior of creators, it crosses the line when it becomes criminal, and I don't want to. If I buy their book, then they might get a royalty check because I bought the book, and I don't want to do that. So that's why I don't like. I'm never going to buy a Blu-ray copy of Jeepers Creepers because I don't want the director getting I don't want to contribute to that guy's royalty check that he gets for every copy sold because that guy's a criminal. But things like that, you have to draw a line. If the guy's just a jerk, if the creator's just a jerk, and you don't agree with their politics, you don't agree with their attitude, then just don't engage with them and try to enjoy the classic work that you enjoyed back in the day. That's kind of the only way to keep sane or the only way to enjoy anything out there.
Yeah. If you go book through and you start vetting all these creators on whether or not they're assholes or they've ever been assholes, you're going to end up having no comic books to enjoy.
Pretty much. And that's the truth. I mean, heck, I would be denying myself a lot of wonderful Denny O'Neil Batman comics just because Denny O'Neil was on the other side of the political spectrum than I am. Doesn't mean that I can't enjoy his Batman comics. Neil Adams is absolutely loco, but his Batman art is tremendous, and I never want to give that up. So I'm fine. I'd just rather not know about it. And if if his heel turn on his opinion about Snake Eyes' ethnicity disappoints me, then that's fine because I still have 155 issues of his G.I. Joe comic that I'll always enjoy.
Yeah, people are allowed to change. Just because you change, your opinions don't agree or don't line up with mine, that's fine. You wrote some amazing stuff. I know who Snake Eyes is. Larry, you know who Snake Eyes is. Whether you try to change it now, sorry, it's already set in stone. You already created the comic. They're not going to go back and recolor it and change all the words and the names. So that's who he is.
Yeah,
that's what it is. So, all right, Mark, you got anything else to say about this before we wrap it up?
Not really. Though I do think that the origin of the Snake Eyes character is actually pretty funny, that he's the most popular character, is that he was literally created the laziest way possible. Hasbro had excess black plastic, so they needed to make a toy that had no paint apps. So like, okay, well, we'll just make him a ninja in an all-black bodysuit. Larry, write a bio for him. And if you read the file card in the back of the Snake Eyes toy, about 75% of it is redacted. It doesn't have a real name. It doesn't have any history. It's the laziest thing ever made, but he ended up becoming the most popular character of G.I. Joe. So, hey, it's just funny.
It's all about the suit.